a former Jim Wells County attorney who observed the first of several unsuccessful investigation attempts into the Box 13 scandal, said for years afterward the whole country down here was rife with rumor. Dean remembers the late September day in 1948 when Stevenson and Frank Hammer, the Texas Ranger who led the ambush against Bonnie and Clyde, came to Alice looking for answers, and they were really hot to prove the election had been stolen, but they did not get very far. Tom Donald at the Texas State Bank wouldn't let them look at the tally sheet, but he let them look at the tally sheet, but he took it away when they started copying names. Stevenson later contested that election. Johnson's attorney successfully argued that federal courts had no jurisdiction in the state election, because that is a very, very common and precedent that we've seen time and time again. The state legislature, which Johnson had a better handle on by 1948, controlled that election. That is the most important thing to take into account there. Like, that is how elections were rigged all over the country, and it was a lot easier to do it then than it is now. Maybe you're seeing some sort of parallels to the certification battles that are taking out in the process, or did take out and take place throughout our election period. So that is very kind of instructive of the legal process. When you can buy those people off, like Johnson was so effective at doing, and a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans were so effective at doing throughout their various cities and counties and towns, they were able to win the election because the state legislatures controlled the process. Up until the Progressive era, they literally just selected the senators. So the time was very, very corrupt and very, very linked between the two, the senators and the state legislatures and governments. So, yeah, that is the very interesting kind of backstory of it. Back in the 1990s, though, there was a kind of interesting investigation into where Box 13 ended up. He successfully tracked it down to Juan M. Escobar, the great-nephew of Ignacio Nachito Escobar, the deputy sheriff, said to have added Johnson votes to the tally sheet on orders from one of Parr's followers, the younger Escobar confirmed in the story. But what is missing about the piece of evidence? Barrera has thus far found only a fake, a tall, rusted box emblazoned with 13 that is proudly displayed in the counter of the Branding Iron Barbecue House in Alice. Duval County Historical Commissioner Chair Lydia O. Canales is eager for Barrera to reveal the real ballot box and find it, since the Duval County Museum collection of George Parr memorabilia, including his Stetson, his alligator skin billfold, and his last will and testament, seems sorely lacking without that famous ballot box that very, very conveniently here in Texas Monthly was stuffed for Lyndon B. Johnson, gaining him his new Senate victory. So as conservative and as many... As conservative as Lyndon B. Johnson can shift, as many times as he can attempt to vote to roll back things that he kind of does support but knows he needs to vote against to win this election against Coke Stevenson, he still is very, very much against a challenge here. And even if he tries to buy off a lot of counties, which he ended up doing, the thing is, Robert Caro notes, again, the biographer, he had run for public office. Coke Stevenson had 12 times, once for county judge, 5 times for state legislator, twice for speaker, twice for lieutenant governor, and twice for governor, and he had never been defeated. So, as one Texas state legislator said, Coke Stevenson was just like Coca-Cola. Stevenson was certainly not a man who actively sought public office. He had spent all of 1947 at home in his ranch, and it took the urging of his political friends to convince him to run for Senate in 1948. He projected the image of a strong, silent type, a political oddity who did not speak unless asked a question. So, as you know, like perfect for that Texas stereotype of that cowboy figure who was just there, I'm out there trying to fight for the people. Southern, sounding like a little bit more Southern, but I guess it's just the way it is. His ultra-conservative political philosophy suited most Texans, pretty much who were very, very rural at that point. Reduction of federal control within the state, promotion of a freer market, and the complete destruction of the communist movement in this country. Liberal critics would often argue that Stevenson was too conservative. They said that he had made the deficit he inherited as governor in 1941 a surplus by 1947. Because he slashed state services. They called him a racist because he opposed black voting rights and did nothing to stop wartime lynching in cities like Texarkana. He was labeled an isolationist because he was opposed to the Marshall Plan and often called European nations beggars. So you can kind of get a sense that is a pretty special brand of politics from a pretty special time in American history, that's for sure. LBJ made use of these views in his campaign against Stevenson, and Johnson's mantra throughout the campaign was preparedness, peace, and progress. So kind of a joke if you think about that peace part when you think about his actual presidency. By preparedness, he meant increasing the military might of the United States. In 1948, the threat of communism had frightened many Americans. The Soviets had solidified their control over Eastern Europe. The United States was caught in a face-off over West Berlin, and in China, the communists were prevailing over the nationalists, as well as the kind of scandal of the Alger Hiss spy ring made Americans realize communism remained at their back door, and it was the ever-looming Red Scare that would come into big prominence in the 50s that Johnson really capitalized on. Johnson made Stevenson's isolationism a key point in his campaign by associating it with communism, which is interesting. He often brought up interesting way of putting it there. He often brought up the contemporary example of Chamberlain appeasing Hitler to demonstrate how unchecked evil would only grow more powerful, and, well, thinking if he wants to stay out of the European countries, he just wants communism to spread, and then it's going to kill us all. So kind of you got to get in there and fight the enemy head on. The appeasement strategy does not work, which is kind of an interesting way of putting it there. Got to give him credit, as deeply screwed up as it is. LBJ did stick by some of his New Deal guns by supporting subsidies for farmers, electricity in rural areas, conservation, education, an increase in social security benefits, an increase in number of hospitals, protection of labor through a minimum wage and humane working hours, even though, he did kind of vote against Taft-Hartley, which is strictly against unions more and more. The platform, particularly his stance on labor, demonstrates how Johnson was adept at playing both sides of the political fence in order to latch on as many votes as possible. He gave Texas liberals his progress agenda, while he oftentimes catered to conservatives in helping defeat Truman's civil rights legislation and helping him pass and uphold the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947. And that was, again, against the will of Truman. He joined the coalition to veto Taft-Hartley. So he kind of really expertly played both sides of the fence, sticking with those popular economic programs like the New Deal that were really actually benefiting people, and still hitting all those conservative high notes for the voters in Texas that needed to attract to win a statewide race. In 1942 and 1944 primary campaigns for governor, Stevenson had won by record-setting margins and avoided runoffs, but his campaign against Johnson was a different matter. Running as an isolationist for the Senate seat was not the same as running as governor. An isolationist was a really kind of well-defined political position that a lot of people had back then. The primary election was scheduled for July 24th. Stevenson felt he would win a majority of votes and would not have to worry about a runoff election. He enjoyed an enormous lead in early polls. Forget about that. And he felt his popularity alone would carry him through because he was so confident, he was really well-loved, and it really represented the epitome of the kind of Texas soldier. LBJ, of course, just hoped that he and the numerous other candidates could keep this from happening. He waited for the right moment. He was aided immensely by the number 3 candidate, George Petty, as Petty was a symbol of uncompromising conservatism and an ardent anti-communist, as we talked about there. So the election happens. They get the results that we talked about, and they were good because he and Stevenson would both now go head-to-head in this primary election. They were bad because now he knew he would have to win more than 70% of the 237,195 George Petty votes from the conservative anti-communist guy, votes that would likely go to the conservative Stevenson. So LBJ now pressed on with 5 weeks to change voters' minds. So this is kind of how he did it. He stepped up a new modern campaign with really some incredible drive. The campaign contained multiple facets, and the first facet was Johnson's means of meeting with voters. Since June, he had used a new type of aircraft, a helicopter, to talk and to dazzle as many Texans as he could in a short amount of time that he had. He dubbed the machine the Johnson City Windmill, which is kind of funny. Again, reporting on this and the kind of breakdown of this is from EIU here. And he says, this is what a reporter called it, coming down on those rural people in those little towns who had never seen anything like it, with that tremendous roar and the dust swirling up, it was an awesome thing. And as it was approaching, there was literally a hurry up. Latecomers were rushing to get there. But as it actually started to come down, there was a silence of awe. People are like, this guy is the coolest guy in history. He is going to be literally, like, he is God. He's an alien approaching. People come from miles around to see it, and really word often got through a distribution of flyers by an advance party that included Bo Jesters, a barbershop quartet at the time, 1940s Texas for you there. During his 5-week helicopter campaign, Johnson made roughly 370 landings in these mostly rural areas. He landed one time, even in North Texas, during his opponent's speech. Imagine that. Imagine you're watching a political rally on TV, and the opponent comes up in a helicopter. that is something. Robert Dallek estimated that Johnson reached over 175,000 rural voters during this campaign. His brother and campaign assistant, Sam Houston Johnson, gave a telling example of the value of this technological display. One old man in Kickapoo kept staring at Lyndon as he talked about farm prices, never hearing a word. Finally, he turned to his wife and said, if he could keep that damn thing from chopping his head off, he might make a good senator. Besides the helicopter, Johnson used other avenues on unprecedented scales. LBJ's efforts really produced the first modern mass media campaign. Johnson would go on to spend more money than anyone on polling, newspaper ads, radio spots, and mailings. He regularly mailed in his Johnson Journal to thousands of rural voters, that's what he called it. And in articles like Communists Favor Coke, he painted a picture of Stevenson as a pawn of northern communist labor bosses because he favored isolationism. Johnson followed those polls very, very closely. In an average campaign, a candidate might conduct really only 3 to 4 statewide polls because they cost $6,000 each. Johnson had conducted 2 or 3 had them conducted by 2 or 3 firms once a week. So he was dropping dime on these polls, 2 or 3 a week from 2 or 3 different firms. He also used his knowledge of radio in a very productive way because he used to own a radio station. Prior to 1948, political radio consisted of really nothing more than speeches. From his experience at the radio station KTBC, he knew he could be more accomplished with the medium. He produced shows with clever scripts, music, professional direction aimed at his positive points and Stevenson's negative points. So it's pretty much a campaign ad 100% of the time. A single statewide broadcast on the radio cost $5,000 to $8,000. He performed a statewide broadcast nearly every day. So Stevens's campaign was really old-fashioned. He felt that because he was so popular, spending excessive amounts on a campaign would seem wasteful, so he did very little. Johnson really had to do this in order to compete. He delivered occasional radio addresses and purchased some full-page newspaper ads and billboard space, but the crux of the campaign was built on driving from county to county in Old Plymouth to talk to small gatherings of people in county courthouses, and really kind of doing the Joe Biden way of retail politics. I'm going to meet you where you are, that kind of thing. Again, very much the kind of Texas cowboy type guy. Another secret to LBJ's 1948 success was his determination and his energy. During a 2-month period, Johnson made more than 350 speeches and worked an average of 18 hours a day on the campaign. So from the middle of June to the end of July, he lost more than 25 pounds. And, I mean, he was a pretty big guy, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, he was busy. He was out there. He was active all the time. He campaigned so intensely that his voice fell to a croak and his body shrank so much that his face became a caricature of itself. And that was really something that is a really interesting thing about Johnson. So, like, he cared so much about, like, the idea of possibly, like, winning and losing, and so much about his political career. He, like, after this moment, he would almost always have these, like, extreme moments of just his body, like, falling apart right when he was about to get, like, something hugely stressful. Like, everything he had built, everything that he worked so hard for, from literally being born in a farmhouse barn to next to nothing and working his way up to president of the United States. Every time he felt like that would be in kind of jeopardy, like that would be a huge, huge moment for him. And this was the first real big one. It was this period in 1948 where he would just refuse Like throughout the campaign, he would have refused to have painful kidney stones removed from fear that he would lose his precious campaign time. He first realized that he had the stones around the time he entered the race in early May. He had them before, and he had been able to pass them, but each day the pain and the nausea only intensified, with doctors advising surgery and the primary election only a few months away. He refused any operation and took painkillers